grandchildren in kind of a double tribute to Grandpa and Grandma. Visited Grandma Stuber's grave recently, taking materials to do a gravestone rub. Regrettably, the paper they took fell short of expectations, and I have in my hand the results of this excursion. Bernice A. Stubb. I've had the unique privilege of being part of Harold's family for 42 years, watching, learning, listening, piecing together the history of the times and experiences that shaped the man we called Dad and Grandpa. It's my honor to be able to share some of that history with you today. Stephen, you want to put up that first picture? Thank you. Harold was born in 1918 at the end of a major world war, in a time of hope and optimism. The grandson of a prosperous farmer who lived 4 miles south of Tremont, Alex Stuber. Harold is the baby. On the left is his dad. On the right is his grandpa, Alex. Seated is his great-grandpa, Jacob. Am I right on that? I think so. Alex, on the right, is grandfather, was a leader in his church and community. A man who shopped at Shipper and Block in Pekin. How many remember Shipper and Block in Pekin? Okay, there we go. In Pekin, and buying his daughters the finest clothing and latest fashions. A man who controlled at one time 5 farms, the head of a home shared by 18 people at its peak. Harold was born the 4th generation of believing men. Taught the gospel from his earliest youth. The oldest son of an oldest son. The heir apparent of a vast estate. If you had thought at that time that here was a baby who would be born into luxury and privilege, it would have been a reasonable expectation. But in God's sovereignty, Harold's ship would encounter some of the storms that the proverb speaks of, which would send it in a different direction. The national economy would turn. Harold would be 11 when the stock market crashed in 1929, and a teenager during the Great Depression of the 1930s. Farms that were purchased at $300 an acre would fall in value to $27 an acre, and all of his grandfather's estate was lost, including Harold's father's farm. Harold grew up poor, the oldest of 12 children, just trying to survive. Harold is on the left. I better not try to stair-step him down. Hap, maybe less. Gene, not sure. The first 6 of 12. If that wasn't enough, Harold was sickly. Next slide, Stephen. I don't know how old he is here. Maybe high school, maybe junior high. Through high school, Harold suffered seizures, thought at the time to be epilepsy, for which there was no treatment. Serious enough that his parents thought he would not be able to work. Harold told me later, when he was young, because of his illness, that he never expected to marry, never expected to have a family. As a last resort, for a young man with no money and poor health, his dad and mom made a risky decision. The Roaring 20s had brought a new breed of young women who wore short skirts, bobbed their hair, listened to jazz, and flaunted their disdain for what was then considered acceptable behavior. I got that sentence from Wikipedia, but in spite of his father's fears of exposing his sons to the worldly girls in Tremont, they would allow Harold, who was just finishing 8 years in a one-room schoolhouse, to go to high school in town. I don't know if Harold ever notice the worldly girls, but it did expose him to drafting classes and the use of tools so that he was able, when he graduated, to get a job first at Keystone and then at Caterpillar. He had learned well the value of hard work and living conservatively. His father had counseled him never to borrow money for any reason, and Harold took this advice to heart. Working for $30 a week, Harold saved enough money to buy his first car when he was 20, a new 1940 Chevrolet. But it wasn't until Harold was 22 when he became convinced that God had healed him of his illness that he surrendered his life completely to the Lord. Kneeling one night on the rough stones in the gravel parking lot at Keystone Steel and Wire, Harold Stuber gave his life to Jesus. Beginning a life of walking in faith, a journey that I dare say has affected every one of you in this room. Whenever he would speak of this experience later, it would be with a broken voice and tears. He was baptized in 1941 with his brother Gene and my dad Harlan. He was part of a little youth revival at that time. They got together with all the young people at the Peoria church for Sunday night singings. They traveled often back and forth to visit friends from sister churches in Ohio. He joined 6 other young men from Peoria and Fremont to form a singing group called the V-Boys. I think we have, left to right, Wes Riggenbach, Larry Riggenbach, Ralph Ackerman, Harold, Gene, Dean Riggenbach, and my dad, Harlan. After one of these singings with the Peoria young people, he offered a young lady a ride home in his 1940 Chevy. On the way, Harold and Bernice agreed that they had each felt the Lord leading them together. By this time, he was 26 and had saved $4,000. So he bought a house on Sampson Street, paying cash for all but $200 of it, and bought his bride there in 1944, began to raise his family, and lived there for 16 years. And for the first time in his life, he would live in a house that had indoor plumbing. In many ways, Harold was a visionary ahead of his time. He contributed to the establishment of the first adult Bible class in Tremont Church in the early 1940s, working with his friend and mentor, Joe Fletter, helping to write lessons, and for many years served as Sunday school superintendent. His longtime friendship with the Riggenbach boys led him in 1953 to be deeply involved with the planting of a mission church in Glendale, where for many years he would often take his family on Sunday afternoons, teaching and encouraging new believers. His desire to participate in ministry and take the gospel to the world evolved as he got older. He helped pack boxes for missionaries. He took his turn in going to a small church in Elgin to teach and preach once a month. And within a year after he retired from Caterpillar in 1983, he had left Tremont and moved to Elgin, where he would pastor that tiny church for 7 years.